So, how was that for a season opener, huh? Pretty good. Pretty good. So, what is going on, people? I hope you are all doing well wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to a brand new Formula 1 season. If you didn't catch my predictions before the Bahrain Grand Prix, then you solely missed out on some almost spot-on predictions. I'll put them up on the screen right now. I was pretty close. I gotta say, I was pretty close. Sonoda smashed it, Alpine struggled, and my top 5 was like kinda on point, but also not really. But the overarching theme from this weekend was the controversy over Turn 4. I have a lot of thoughts, I have a lot of opinions. I wanted to make my voice heard on Twitter, which, by the way, if you're not following me on Twitter, link is down there as always. But I couldn't put my thoughts into whatever it is, 190 characters, whatever Twitter allows for. I have too many things going on in the brain to put into that few words, so I had to make a video about it because it's too much for me to control. It's something I've always had an issue with F1 ever since I started watching. It kind of comes up periodically throughout every single season, and this instance was just so massive and it affected the race in a very big way. So here is what I think of the Turn 4 track limits. Hopefully I can keep my thoughts somewhat concise. Now we're just going to jump right into the deep end here. We're going to cut right to that overtake late in the race by Max Verstappen, where he eventually had to give the position back to Lewis Hamilton. We see Max make the move on the outside going into Turn 4. He gets ahead of Lewis Hamilton by the apex, self-plug, and ends up just overshooting the corner, going wide, exceeding those track limits, going outside of the white lines, all 4 wheels off the track, and then eventually being ahead of Lewis Hamilton. And of course, I am 100% against drivers passing and overtaking while not obeying track limits and going wide and using the extra tarmac as an advantage to make the move. That's illegal. But this particular overtake isn't so cut and dry, and we're gonna get into that right now. Now, to the naked eye, when you're just quickly watching the clip of the overtake that Max did on Lewis, it looks like an illegal overtake. It's clear he went off the track and regained in the lead, and that's just how it looks. But it's not so simple, because if you really think about it, it really looks like Max kind of went a bit too deep into that corner and kind of swung it out a bit wide, took a bit too much speed. That's fine, it happens. Just make sure you let the driver through and don't go ahead of them. But the problem is if they were side by side, Lewis went to the exit curb. His 2 left tires were on the exit curb, meaning Max would have had to have gone and taken the evasive action to go and just stay away from hitting Lewis. And the same thing would have happened regardless. And I hear a lot of people using that mindset to kind of justify what Max did. But the problem is, that's not at all what happened. Let's not play a game of what ifs when it comes to stuff like this, because that didn't happen. If it did, that would be a completely different story. Now, to get some outside perspective here from a racing driver themselves, on the F1 live show post-race, Pietro Fittipaldi made his very strong opinions heard about why he thinks this was Max's place to be had and why he deserved to take the lead of the race at that corner. His argument was the same sentiment that I brought up earlier, where Max was clearly ahead of Lewis by quite some margin, and that was his corner even before the apex. Before he went off the track, he had already made the move. Sure, you could say that, but the way I see it is Max took too much speed into the corner, swung it out a bit wide, and probably should have snuck back into Lewis's draft right after the corner was done. So I guess that's the video over, right? Everyone, have a great one. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Yeah, no, it's not that plain and simple. This is not the end of the video. Let's keep talking. There is so much more to this story than meets the eye and that just meets the race. The big controversy, the reason that this particular moment is being talked about more than any other illegal overtake in the past, is because of the fact that qualifying that same corner, drivers were strictly prohibited from putting more than 2 wheels off the track. It was a lap time immediately deleted bunch of drivers got caught for it in qualifying. It was a hard and fast rule. This being because it was clear to the stewards and the FIA and everyone involved that by going around that corner and taking that line, it was giving the driver an unfair advantage on the lap time and was basically helping them go quicker around the circuit. Which is obvious. When you extend track limits in certain areas of every single circuit, you're going to gain some sort of advantage on the timing sheet. But then in the race, everyone just starts exploiting the track limits at that same corner, going super wide, and nothing was happening. What happened to that unfair advantage that was being gained when it was being so strict in qualifying? All of a sudden in the race, it's cool, everything's fine. Lewis started taking an extraordinarily wide line consistently through that corner, which obviously helped him gain time on Max when he's trying to catch him, even though regardless Max still somehow caught him, which was insane, but that's for another video. Lewis was quite literally gaining an advantage by doing such a thing. Now I know there's a lot to unpack here and it's really confusing, but I'm going to go through and read a Twitter thread by the man, Mr. Sam Collins. He did an absolutely incredible breakdown on this, so I'm going to go ahead and read the whole thing now. If you're not the kind of person that likes to listen and prefers to read, I'll leave a link to the thread in the description down below where you can go and read it, and then come join the video again at this timestamp right here. Come back then, and then we'll be good to go. So let's get this going. On Friday, after free practice, the rules relating to track limits at turn 4 were changed. Advantage in terms of 27.3 means overtaking or defending, not lap time. This document was circulated to teams and drivers. And I'll read 27.3. All that said was drivers must take reasonable effort to use the track at all times and may not leave the track without justifiable reason. Once the Bahrain Grand Prix got underway, every single driver in the field exploited the exit at turn 4. Pretty much every lap. Here you can see Tsunoda and Leclerc doing just that. And here you can see Max Verstappen crossing the white line as well, exceeding track limits to improve his lap time. Same as everyone else. He does this every single lap. It is allowed due to the section 21.1a, where it does claim that drivers are allowed to go over the line. A key difference though, with what Hamilton was doing, how far off he was going in turn 4, he was consistently further off than most other cars. You can see here, Lewis way farther out than Max ever was. Max was maybe a couple inches from the white line. Lewis was a clear couple feet. Red Bull later noticed this and radioed Verstappen to tell him he could do the same. Verstappen asked how it was even legal, but then started to do it too. So then Verstappen starts to get the same advantage of Lewis, which might be why he started catching him so much quicker. Curiously, Sergio Perez was not using as much of the runoff at turn 4 at all through the race and was not given the same info as Verstappen to allow him to use the exit of turn 4 like Hamilton, so he didn't. This may have cost him time, and Bottas also did not get this radio call either. On lap 36, 37, Hamilton gets calls from the team that he needs to be careful on track limits. He asks what the rule actually is. He thought that there were no track limits at turn 4. Team tell him to do it like qualifying, so he does. So then we see Lewis Hamilton start to not be so horrible in terms of track limits. Verstappen was then also told to stick to track limits, so he was then told back to doing what he was doing before, crossing the white line, but still not as much as Hamilton had been doing earlier in the race, but more than Hamilton now was. So it seems that race control deemed crossing the white line at turn 4 acceptable, but then decided partway through the race that Hamilton was crossing the line too much, and by then also Verstappen, possibly as a result from queries from Red Bull. It is clear that crossing the white line at turn 4 was acceptable through the entire race. What was not clear was how far over you could go before it was unacceptable, and that did seem to change during the race. I think this needs to be more tightly defined, yada yada yada, it goes on. You get the idea. The problem with what happened here was the fluctuation of track limits, and in my opinion, that can't be happening. You get into a very dangerous spot in terms of rule set and governing those rules once you start to become lax on them. Now, will we ever know how much of advantage Lewis had by exploiting this rule? Absolutely not. Would Max have caught him sooner if he had to stay closer to the white line? Probably, but that's negligible at this point. The problem here really is that this should not have been even happening in the first place, and it sends a very dangerous precedent for the rest of the season. And if the FIA and Formula One don't crack down on this soon, it could get really messy really quickly. In my mind, it is absolute lunacy to enforce such strict rules in qualifying, but then lacks them out so much in the race. Now, I understand in qualifying you need that stricter enforcement of track limits because even the smallest exploit of track limits can be the difference between getting pole and P2. So you really need to make sure drivers are staying honest on the track. But then the same should be held, the same precedent should be held in the race if that's the case. Because if the FIA tries to claim that there's an advantage in qualifying but not in the race, that's just ridiculous. Now, on the matter of if Lewis himself deserved to win that race, yeah, of course he did. Mercedes, Red Bull, every other team on the field was just playing the hand they were dealt. They were told they could exploit the limits, and they did. But the problem was when everything was changing mid-race. All of a sudden, oh, track limits are wider now. We can go wider. Oh, but no, not too wide. That's too wide. You have to bring it back. And it was just this flip-flopping of rules and regulations while the race was happening live that just absolutely threw a massive wrench into the spectacle of this amazing battle between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. It would have been so much better if the rules were just enforced the way they were. Lewis had to stay on the track, Max had to stay on the track, and it was just a proper dogfight for the win. And of course, if things get argy-bargy and someone has to go off the track, that's fine. That's racing. Let the drivers race, let them do what they do best, but don't give them the freedom to exploit track limits and then tell them they're doing something wrong. That sends a dangerous precedent. I feel like I've been talking in circles for the past, however, 20 minutes. That's fine, let's just wrap this thing up. So I guess that ends the debate in a way, but also not really, because I know people are still going to be screaming and yelling about this whole thing for weeks to come, because that's how much time we have to fill until we're finally at round 2 in Imola. But I hope you all enjoyed watching this one as much as I enjoyed making it. Feel free to lick the stamp and send that subscribe button down below. Drop a big old like if you really liked it, and don't miss the apex.